Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala Sayyid al-Awwaleen wal-Akhirin. Nabiyyina Muhammadan wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. All praise are due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last, his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, my beloved brothers and sisters, to our friends, our viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we have come to the final section of our short course in looking at reform, resistance, revival, and how this impacts the Muslim world. And that is so important for us today because of the unique situation that we find ourselves in, an extreme situation. And that is that our potential is so great. We have such large numbers and wealth and military and intelligence and strategic position. But yet, we are being attacked and brutalized and driven out of our homelands in an unprecedented fashion. And this causes a type of frustration within the ranks of the Muslim Ummah. And people are looking for solutions. And many times people tend to blame external factors on what is happening and where we are actually going. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us very clearly, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change that which is in themselves. So until there is internal change within the Ummah, we cannot expect the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it is crucial for us to be able to look into ourselves. And one of the unique aspects of the Muslim Ummah in its final form, because we recognize that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not the first prophet of Islam, but he was the last of a long series of prophets and messengers that came to every nation and every tribe. But one of the points that differentiated this ummah from other nations is the issue of revival, and that is tajdeed, that we are able to renew our Islam. We are able to take it back to the original form and put it in a relevant fashion. That is something special. It's not a reform in the Western sense. It is a type of islah. There is a repair that is involved in this because, again, it's internal. So there has to be a type of repair that goes on within the ummah. And then a dynamism, a revival then comes in order to change the conditions that we are in. Now, we find ourselves at the end of this course, also at the end of Black History Month. And it's important for us to be relevant to what is happening around us. And there are scholars in the United States, African-American scholars, who came to the conclusion in the 20th century that the history and contributions of Black people, of people of African descent, especially those who were suffered in slavery, was being intentionally omitted from the history books, or it was distorted. And so therefore, they developed a special month, a time when people would be forced to reflect upon what happened to this embattled community. Surprisingly enough, although there is no racism in Islam, but Muslims themselves, we have suffered from tribalism and racism throughout the history of Islam. And it is only those who are overcome it, as in the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who are successful. And so therefore, we need to be relevant to our situation, and we want to end up looking at the revivals of Islam, looking at scholars who gave the direction, who answered relevant contemporary questions. That's what we need today. So we want to take our final example for this section from the African continent itself. And that's surprising to many Muslims because for many Muslims, they did not think that Islam actually went below the Sahara Desert. And so when you look at the map, here you see the green, and that dark green is where Islam spread within the first 100 years or so. And that, of course, is an amazing spread in those times. Nothing like that before. But if you go a few hundred years after that, then you will see that Islam actually is spreading south. It is going from North Africa down across the desert. And that is where that golden yellow is there. And so you can see that this is part of the heartlands of the Muslim world. And so we want to look at this not as a separate entity, but actually as part of the Muslim world. And when Muslims came into the African continent, it was initially there was a military confrontation because the Romans had attacked from the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But following the military confrontation to deal with the oppression and deal with the armies, Islam actually spread peacefully through interchange of scholars and pious people, and mainly through trade. So when we look at North Africa, you will see that the northern part is separated from West Africa and Central Africa by a great Sahara Desert. And what was happening at that time is that below the Sahara Desert, and it came known to the Muslim world, especially in the 10th century, that below the Sahara there were gold mines, some of the most active gold mines on the face of the planet Earth. And so trade routes were developed based upon the ancient routes that the Tuareg, that the desert people used to go across. And you find from Tripoli, Libya, to Ghadames, and then down into the Kanem-Bornu area, which is now like Chad and parts of the Sudan. That was one of the main highways. Another one started from Qayrawan in the north in Tunis, Tunisia, and to Tarhut and down to Tadmekka, and it ended in a place called Gao, and that is present-day Niger. So this is it's the seashore below the sea of sand. And the third major route started with Fez and went to Sijil Massa, and then down into an area known as Ghana. It's not the Ghana of today, but it would include parts of Niger, Mali, Senegal, this area there. And so what was happening is that this active gold trade route made the kingdoms and empires below the Sahara very rich and powerful, and of course in the north also very rich and powerful. And it was the Berber people or the Sanhaja people who would take people across the desert. Now, with Islam having spread to that part of the world and time going by, there was a need for revival. And it was around 1039 that one of the great revivalists of Islam, Abdullah ibn Yasin, rahimahullah, one of the scholars of the Darul Murabitun, that he actually went from the Sousse region in Morocco, and he ended up in what is now Mauritania. And then he went south all the way down to Senegal, to the Niger River, and he influenced the people, reviving Islam amongst the people at in that area. And after he was made shaheed, he died in the path, the movement was taken over by Sidi Abu Bakr ibn Umar, and he made his capital Marrakesh. And you can see the famous Kutubiyya minaret that is there in Morocco up until today. So this movement called Al-Murabitun had a great impact upon the people of North Africa, of Andalusia in the north, also West Africa, Senegal, and it reached all the way to Central Africa. And so this is where our story, or the section of our story begins in a place called Hausa land, Bilad al-Hausa. And the Hausa people are one of the Saharan people whose population stretches right across West Africa. It is one of the largest linguistic groups in West Africa and Central Africa, going right across. The Hausa people are agriculturalists, they are merchants, and their land was very famous and very well known. And so it is in this area of Hausa land that we find that after a period of time, even though Islam had spread to that area from the time of the Murabitun, corruption had come into the land. And by the 18th century, according to a famous book called the Kano Chronicles, it was a place of gloom and oppression and tension. The leaders were living luxurious lives, and the people were suffering under terrible taxes. And some of the leaders who were superficially Muslim even called the tax jizya, as though this is a tax being given to non-Muslims within a Muslim state. The scholars, for the most part, were silent. And this again is where your scholars can play a negative role if there's no resistance amongst the scholars. Women in West Africa, who traditionally had a strong position within society, even in the 16th century, they had a queen in Hausa land, Queen Amina, who ruled for 30 years. And but their position deteriorated to the point where some of the kings, is actually recorded, Allah knows best, but they said he even had over 1,000 wives. Okay, so women were like useless within the society. Corruption was in the land. The cultural practices took over what little of Islam there was. And it's in this atmosphere that our individual, Shaykh Uthman dan Fodiyo, rahimahullah, who's known as Shehu, that's how they call him in the Hausa Fulani language. This is when he was born in 1754. And he was born in Sokoto State, which is part of present-day Nigeria. Now, similar to our revivalists in the past, remember Ibn Taymiyyah, Shah Waliullah Dehlawi, Imam as-Suyuti, the great scholars we have looked at who make this major impact on the Muslim world. He was also born into a family of scholars. And these scholars who came from a people called the Fulani or the Fulbe people, and these are a nomadic people, and they started in the area of Senegal, the Futa Toro region, and they traveled with their cows, their nomads, right across, even to the Sudan. And so the Fulbe people were well known, and with the Fulbe or the Fulani people, they had a specialized group called Turunkawa in Arabic, but Turadbe. And these Turadbe people were scholars. So the scholars would travel with the caravans, and they would dedicate their life to scholarship and to business at the same time. This is where Shaykh Uthman was actually born. His father was Muhammad ibn Salih, and the name Fodiyo, so his name is Dan Fodiyo, Uthman Dan Fodiyo, which means the son of a scholar. Okay, but his mother was a scholar too, Hawa, and Hawa bint Muhammad. And they were educated in a system called the Timbuktu educational system. Now, many people do not realize that Timbuktu was a center of knowledge. And by the 16th century, the Sankore Institute had over 100,000 students. Every person in Timbuktu was fluent in Arabic, and it was a great center of Maliki fiqh and scholarship. So they came in this Maliki tradition. So that's your connection from Medina, Imam Malik, right across into Egypt, North Africa, up into Andalusia, down into West Africa. This is the Maliki lands. Okay, and so Shehu, and that's the name I'll use meaning Shaykh Uthman dan Fodiyo. Shaykh himself, he learned Arabic from a very early age. He could speak Fulfulde, the language of the Fulani people, and Hausa, and one of the dialects of the Tuareg people, Tamashekh. And they even give you his Senate, like where does he get his knowledge from? And we saw this with Ibn Taymiyyah and Shah Waliullah. Okay, we saw it with our scholars. In this case, the Shaykh Uthman taught him the Ishrinat. So these are Maliki works. Shaykh Abdurrahman ibn Hamada taught him Al-Khulasa. This is grammar. Okay, Shaykh Uthman Biduri Muqtasa in fiqh. Okay, and so he went through the tafsir of Al-Karashi, Muhammad Tanbu, and he had a whole series of scholars who enriched him. His life from an early age was dedicated to scholarship. He was also influenced later on in his life by other people as well, not just the local scholars. And this is interesting because we even see some of the names of our great scholars, getting mentioned. There was Sheikh Ahmed ibn Muhammad, Tafsir, Hashim al-Zamfari, Tafsir, Muhammad ibn Raj. But scholars like Sheikh Abdul Wahab Sha'rani, Egypt, famous in fiqh, okay, flexibility in fiqh. Here's your Sheikh Jalaluddin as-Suyuti, had a great impact upon Shaykh Uthman dan Fodiyo, Sheikh Abdul Karim al-Maghili, Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, of Morocco, Sheikh Mukhtar al-Kunti of Timbuktu. These are just some of the scholars who had influence on the Sheikh's life. But what is interesting, and we want to always look for, what connects us together. And that is that, the Sheikh or the Sheikh would say that, if there can be anything said about me, I am but a wave of the waves of Jibril ibn Umar. So this is one of the great influences upon his life. And Jibril ibn Umar, rahimahullah, was from a place called Agadez. Okay, that's the Tuareg land, and that is in Niger. And so the Shaykh who studied Aqidah with him and Usul al-Fiqh and grammar, and also he was teaching him Tajdeed. He was teaching him revivalism. Okay, that should be a revival intellectually, morally, spiritually, theologically, a complete revival. And so by 20 years, the Shaykh had mastered the Islamic sciences, and Jibril himself took a pledge to Shaykh Uthman dan Fodiyo. This is how brilliant he was as a student. In 1804, he actually pledged himself. Now, what is significant about this? And how does it connect? You remember our great scholars, and we had mentioned even from back in the time of Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, we mentioned the impact of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah that he had on people. And we find in Medina itself, there was the great scholar Sheikh Muhammad Hayat Sindhi. So this person was from the Sindh. So that is like the west coast of what is now Pakistan. Now remember now, Hadith scholarship was stronger in the Indo-Pakistani continent for centuries than anywhere else in the Muslim world. And Muhammad Hayat Sindhi was one of those scholars teaching revivalism, revive Islam. And from amongst his students, the people who were influenced by him, and it's interesting to see these scholarly chains, and I ran across this doing a research of Shaykh Uthman dan Fodiyo. You find the famous Mizjaji family, and you find Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab. This is the revivalist from Arabia, whose name in many cases is distorted, but if you actually look at his teachings, he was not really involved in present-day politics of Saudi Arabia. He was basically a revivalist who was very similar to Ibn Taymiyyah. It was in that Hanbali way of revivalism of Ibn Taymiyyah. He was influenced directly by Hayat Sindhi. You also find Sheikh Muhammad Murtada az-Zabidi, And this Zabidi were people from Yemen. It's a famous revival that happened in the Yemen itself. And amongst the people affected by Hayat Sindhi is Shah Waliullah ad-Dahlawi. Now you remember the impact that he had on India. There was also, of course, Sheikh Muhammad Murtada Zabidi, but here it is, Sheikh Jibril ibn Umar. So Jibril, this Tuareg man from the desert, made Hajj and stayed in Medina for some time. And he was impacted with revivalism, as these others revivalists were, and he came back and became the principal teacher of Shaykh Uthman and Fodiyo. So you can see that the revivalism, it's like a chain of revivalism. And this is important for us to be able to revive the chains in the Muslim world and to realize that revivalism, tajdeed, is part of our tradition. It is part of the way that Islam comes alive again in the people's lives. So by 1774, the Shaykh Uthman dan Fodiyo, he went into the field. And he was teaching. This is a young scholar. He taught classes during the week. He gave lectures on the weekend. Okay? So to the masses of people, he taught the usul, the foundations of Islam, Iman, the foundations of their understanding of Islam. And he was especially strong in correcting bid'ah. Now, this is something that most people don't realize about him. But he was really strong in correcting innovations that had come into Hausaland. And he confronted extremism amongst the scholars. He educated and uplifted women. And he made demands of the kings. So you could say he was political in a sense. He even demanded from one of the kings who had eventually attacked him, he demanded to free all political prisoners, to respect the turban and the hijab, to lift the unjust taxes. So he was a very relevant scholar. His tajdeed was not just theoretical. He's dealing with al-waqi', dealing with what is happening on the ground. And so by 1789, look at this now, 1774, by 1789, this is like 15 years, he had such an impact on Hausaland that when he traveled from city to village, 1,000 students traveled along with him. And every place he stopped became like a university of Islam. Now, what was important about him, and I'm saying this because this is exactly what we need today. And this is where people don't understand the contributions that African scholars have made to Islam, and how relevant what they have done is today. What is important about his revival? That he taught in clear classical Arabic. He wrote over 150 works. Clear classical Arabic. He documented his information. He was very concise. Okay, but when he spoke to the people, he spoke to them in their language. So he would speak to people in Fulfulde, in Hausa, in Tamashek. He did poetry as well. He would go to the masses of the people. And he focused, during his early time, that first 30 years, on aqidah, on fiqh, and tasawwuf, right, spirituality. Okay, and he left textbooks that could be used by his students. Now, his primary book during his first 30 years, which is when he was in the field, okay, and that's when he had the impact on the social, intellectual life of the people, was a book called Ihya as-Sunnah wa Ikhmad al-Bid'ah. Okay, so this is a textbook. It reads like a textbook. Another one was called Nur al-Albab. Okay, but these books, they were textbooks of how to take people out of bid'ah into the sunnah. And that's something that people don't recognize about him, because many people think that he is a scholar of tasawwuf and he's extreme in so-called spirituality. No, this reads like the heaviest work in terms of fighting against bid'ah and establishing the sunnah, to the point where he had to actually respond to some of the scholars, because they said, no, this is too heavy. And he said, let the critic of this book know that my intention is the revival of the Sunnah of Muhammad and the destruction of satanic innovation. My intention is neither to bring shame upon the people nor to engage in finding faults. Right? I'm just bringing out the truth. Okay? And this is an amazing work that is done by the scholar. What are some of the areas? And this is a deep study which could take a whole semester, really to look at his life. But just to give you an idea of some of the areas that he focused on, he went right from the beginning. He started with Baba Tahara, that's purity in your fiqh books, okay? And he looked at the people's hygiene, how they dealt with even relieving themselves in the washroom, and their extreme practices they had. And some of them, even in a negative way, that they would relieve themselves in churches to try to disgrace the Christian. He said, no, this is wrong. This is not from Sunnah. So he corrected that. And he even went to the intimate parts of menstruation for women and childbirth, showing people how to clean themselves properly, right? And to avoid extra fasting and starvation and superstition. And surprisingly enough, he even opposed female genital mutilation, which is called FGM. And that is a crisis in many of the East African countries. Up until today, the scholars are battling this pharaonic practice, this genital mutilation. And he opposed this, and he showed that there is a type of circumcision for men, even a slight circumcision for women, that is from the Sunnah. It's in the Shafi'i school of thought. The majority of the scholars do not have circumcision for women, but there is a Sunnah form in the Shafi'i school. Okay? So he brought this out, but he opposed FGM. And that's amazing for those who understand what's happening on the ground in the Muslim world today. And so he went into the corrupt practices of marriages. And look at some of our communities. Okay, that, the maha. In some countries, the dowry is unattainable. It's very difficult. And then the walima. He even said, if you're going to have the marital party or the walima afterwards, don't have lewd singing and intoxication. And you find Muslims up until today, they're pious during the nikah. But at the walima, especially when it gets around 10 o'clock at night and all the so-called pious people have gone home, then you start to see some corrupt practices happening even in Muslim weddings. That's where you can tell who's really practicing Islam. The Shaykh opposed it and brought them to the Sunnah. In their food and their drink, he brought them into the Sunnah. In the masjids, he told them, avoid storytelling, superstitious type of stories. And he went to their practices when a child is born. They had strange blood sacrifices and strange spiritual practices. This word iskoki, the iskoki were like the jinn, right? So they had strange practices with the jinn. And so he helped them, to come out of these strange practices. This is practical Sunnah now. This is not theoretical in an ivory tower. He's dealing with the practices of people on the ground. And that's, I believe, one of the main reasons why we're being held back today from being the strong ummah that we need to be to combat the evil that's happening to our innocent people. The Shaykh also looked into medicine and in the areas of magic and superstition. And magic is one of the bid'ah, or it is one of the ways, shirk even, which is up until now in our Muslim community. How many people go to magicians and fortune tellers and try to make cures, dealing with the jinn? It's still today with us. How many people are still wearing talismans? How many people are straying from the Sunnah? The Shaykh opposed these things on the ground. He also touched on the veneration of trees. Now in West Africa they had used baobab trees and they used to sacrifice in Jahiliyyah, in ignorance. He opposed it. And he brought them into the Sunnah so they understand there are malaika, there are angels, there is the jinn, right? But you do not communicate with the jinn to try to gain power over them, like they did in what they call Bodhi rituals. Okay, so he took them away from these jahili, ignorant practices. And it's interesting for us up until today, because some Christian practices were starting to filter in. He said, do not follow the holidays of the people of the book. And he kept them away from it. Make our sacred days, our Eids, right, our Muharram, our days, make those your Ashura. These are the important days. And that's up until today. We're having this problem right now. Christmas, Valentine's Day, Halloween, right? Easter. Muslims even trying to say Halalween, right? There's a form of Halloween, halal form. There's no Halalween. You can't make a pig halal. Even if you say Bismillah Allahu Akbar on a pig, it's still not halal, because the pig itself is najis. So surprisingly enough, way back then, 18th century, he said, come out of these practices, because this is what is destroying our society. He took them away from grave worship, going to the graves, praying to them, rubbing on them, rubbing on masjids. Look at some of our countries up until today and the bid'ah practices that are going on within our countries. That's the revival we need right now. What is holding us back? Why are we a mass of people that can only make dua, but after that we can hardly do anything? Why are our leaders so helpless, apparently helpless? Why is the stagnation there? The rot comes from inside out. And that is the kind of revival that we are in need of today. But he even took it to another level, and he went to business itself to show the business people to avoid cheating and deception in business. Now, that's a big thing, because business in many of our countries, our economic things, taking interest in usury, raising prices. It's a big problem in the Muslim world. Interest banking. How can you get the help of Allah if we have interest banks within our countries? Okay, so Shaykh Uthman, in his revival in this area, instituted this. And that's the difference between him and Imam as-Suyuti and Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, and even Shah Waliullah Dahlawi to a certain extent. They encouraged people. They lit the flames of the revival. Shaykh Uthman, he took it a step further, as you're going to see. He lit the flame, and then he actually implemented it. So he went to the scholars, this is a young person, and he defined for them what an authentic scholar is supposed to be. And he showed the scholars there's a danger in wealth and position. And you will see our scholars today, like they say, scholars for dollars. You see them being bought out and being used by oppressors within the Muslim world. He also told the scholars, watch out for being stubborn, obstinate, right? Obstinacy and unnecessary disagreements in school of thought. Look how important that is today. He said, come out of this blind taqleed, this blind imitation. And he said, we have to criticize ourselves. That's a very important quality. And he focused on his tasawwuf. Now, people will say, okay, he's known for being a scholar of tasawwuf in the Qadiriyya tariqah. Okay, and he was the highest level of Qadiriyya. Okay, but yet you see him the highest level of fighting bid'ah. That sounds strange, right? Because today you say, no, he's a Salafi. No, he's a Sufi. Okay, he's both. But what did he do? His tasawwuf, as we found out in the case of Shah Waliullah, and we found it with Imam as-Suyuti, right? It was the sober, character-building spirituality, tazkiyatun nafs. And he focused on this for the masses of the people. And he focused on the purification of the heart. And he said, purify your hearts from ujub, conceit, from pride, from anger, from hasad, envy and jealousy, from riyah. And he said, your tasawwuf, your spirituality, should be to reform your character in order to affect social relationships. Then what happens? You reform society. So there it is. That's the Islah. So that is what we need today, that our spirituality needs to invigorate us in order to make change in society. And there is a beautiful part in one of his books that he wrote about Madakhil Iblis. And this I found is so important. It's like he's talking to us today. And here I want to give you a little bit of taste of his actual teachings, so you can actually taste it, not just see the name of the book. He said that the heart, which is the key, if it's right, according to the hadith, everything's right. If it's corrupt, everything's going to go wrong. It's surrounded, it's got a wall around it, and there are entrances into the heart. And the shaitan, wa'iyadu billah, is trying to get to our hearts, trying to destroy us. And he said there are certain entrances into our hearts. Okay, you may think you're on sunnah, you may think that you're, but the evil one comes to you through the entrances. What are they? And he named some of them. He said jealousy. If you are jealous and envious of other people, evil can come in. Uncontrolled anger and desires. Look at what's happening with Muslim communities breaking up. We can't solve our problems, so one masjid becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8. Greed and ambition. You see, this is what is happening where people have this ambition for power. They want to be president. They want to be Amir. They want to be a leader. So a good Muslim changes. The evil one comes to them and they don't even realize it. Now this is an interesting one. He said excessive love of food and drink. And that's important to us because many people, when they look at the month of Ramadan, they say, get the meat, organize iftar, because the most important thing for them is their samosas. They need a pile of samosas to break their iftar fast. Okay, so if you love that food excessively, if you love to drink things, how they taste, excessively, the door of the devil is open. He said haste. If you're too hasty with things, it can lead to unnecessary, it can lead you to terrible things. Unless, of course, it is something which is necessary. And the Prophet ﷺ even said, Al-ajala min ash-shaytan. Haste is from the devil. Okay? He also showed that if you have wealth that exceeds the basics, okay, then evil can come in. He said, and this is interesting again to us, fanaticism in madhab, school of thought, your fiqh, and following your whims. Hatred and contempt for those who disagree with you. Look at some of the Muslims today. They look at another Muslim from a different school of thought. Maybe they're all Sunnis or a different movement, and it's like hatred in their eyes, hatred in their mouth. That means the shaitan has entered their heart and maybe they don't even realize it. He also said, from these madakhil is burdening common people with pondering about the essence and descriptions of Allah more than is necessary. Okay, and that's another thing. People, they learn some aqidah and they start testing everybody. Where is Allah? Describe Allah. These are arguments that should only be discussed by those who have knowledge, not the masses of the people. And his last point in this work of Madakhil Iblis, he said, holding suspicion against Muslims. Su'adhan. And this is really, really important issue. If we can overcome this, then a lot of our problems of disunity can be solved. And you're going to see it as we go in the month of Ramadan. That for some people who have these weaknesses in their heart, suddenly there's 2 Ramadans, there's 2 Eids. Some of them have 3 Eids, but there's only 1 moon. Why do you have that? It's not because of fiqh. It's because your hearts are divided. It's not ikhtilaf al-matali'. It's not the difference in the horizons. And so the Shaykh rahimahullah, in his tajdeed, he revived the position of women. It's not feminism. He said take a balanced position. He said women should be educated, come out to the public arenas. You will have a separate section, but we will teach you. And he said to the men, if you don't teach your women, the women disobey your husband. That's heavy. And come out to the halaqah. I will establish special study circles for women. Okay? And because of this, in Hausaland, there were at least 48 known scholars amongst the women during his time and just, after him. 6 have poetry that survived them. His daughter, Nana Asma'u, whose book you can get, her book's actually published about Nana Asma'u, Khadija and Hafsa and Maryam. All of these are all scholars. Okay, and Nana Asma'u wrote books in poetry and treatises in Arabic. And the emirs would go to them for advice. Just like Aisha radiallahu anha and Salama, the emirs would actually go to them for advice. And so, as we learned in the Shaykh's life, the first part, he taught the usul, he corrected bid'ah, right? He confronted extremism. That was the first 30 years. He was attacked by the evil kings. Okay, now this is another level for your scholar now. Okay, he's under attack. What does he do? He made hijrah with his companions. And they made hijrah in 1804. And the people took bay'ah to him. They took a pledge to him as Amir al-Mu'mineen. And they had a type of Badr where they were outnumbered. Allah gave them victory. And they overcame their enemies. He gave flags to his students from all over Hausaland. And in a short time, they conquered 250,000 square miles. That's not a long time ago, right? 1804, that's just like 19th century, right? And they governed for 100 years using Sharia. Okay? And their Khilafat was even recognized by the Ottoman Turks. And another amazing thing that he did, that, after they had consolidated power, he said, I didn't come for power. And he said, now you choose your Amir. He got together the scholars and those notable people, and they chose his son Muhammad Bello, who was a great scholar and a great leader, not because it's his son, but because he was the great general and the great scholar. But he left, and for the last 7 years of his life, he taught. He taught higher level of spirituality. He taught some of the fine points of how to rule. He even taught political, how to govern according to Islam. Now look at the life of this scholar. So he is of benefit in all phases of his life. He's in benefit before the struggle, teaching people. When the jihad came, he's in benefit. He's of benefit. He wrote books. After the jihad was over, consolidating an Islamic state, he was of benefit all the way through, following Sunnah. And amazingly enough, he died at 63 years old, the exact age of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the lessons we learn from the life of the Shaykh is the importance of Islamic education, importance of balance in application of Islamic knowledge, the necessity of women being educated and involved in the Islamic movement, inclusion of tasawwuf in Sharia, not outside, flexibility in the school of thought, the importance of internal development, especially the heart. And so this is our African Muslim revivalists. We looked at Jalaluddin as-Suyuti, 1445 to 1505, Shaykh Uthman then Fodiyo, 1754 to 1817, right? They were both scholars who sought to revive and purify Islamic teachings. They lived at different regions in Africa at different times, but they shared their approaches to revival, tajdeed, okay, based on knowledge and also relevancy. And they brought about Islah, social reform. That is what we are looking for today. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could bless this ummah with this type of revival on the ground today. So I want to open up the floor for any questions that anybody has concerning Shaykh Uthman then Fodiyo. and this final scholar that we are looking at here. Floor is open.
There's a question here.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Quick. For those of us who are students, Western African Islamic scholarship is not as accessible as knowledge coming from the Middle East and South Asia. What should we do about this?
Okay, it is there, of course, but it is really sort of on a university level. Or if you're involved in West Africa or North Africa, then you'll get it. To start with, an easy way, if you go to my website, which is hakimquick.com, okay, hakimquick.com. And I did a series of lectures where you can get Shaykh Uthman dan Fodio's life. It's called African Sunrise. I also did, I did a series which you can actually download there and get sources and get information about the black Muslim experience, East African Muslims, the Empire Strikes Black. There's a series of lectures. This can help you right away to get into your sources, and you'll have some connections right away into this. Okay? Floor is open for any other general questions anybody may have. Okay, there's a question here on the ground.
You said a word I wasn't familiar with about how Shaykh Uthman dan Fodio was like Qadari or something like that?
Yes, so I said that Shaykh Uthman dan Fodio, he was part of the Qadariya tariqah. So this is the tariqah or the Sufi movement. They follow Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jailani. So the followers of Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jailani, they call Qadariya. And the Qadariya is one of the first major tariqas or movements of Tasawwuf. And they entered West Africa through the people of the desert, the Kunta and of Timbuktu. So Shaykh Uthman was considered to be the highest level of Qadari tariqah in West Africa at the time. At the same time, he was a scholar of fiqh. And he was a scholar who struggled against bid'ah. Okay, so this is an amazing person. And that's the kind of balance that I'm talking about. It may be difficult for people who have been hearing extremes, but somehow we need to get balance today more than ever to unite ourselves in the face of the onslaught that is happening in the Muslim world. Floor is open.
How did political and social circumstances in the contemporary era differ among scholars in West Africa than the Middle East and South Asia?
Yes, so how did, the question is, how did the issues, differ between scholars in Africa and Asia? Really, I've lived in both places and studied both places. It's not that much difference. The only difference is language. The only difference is your environment. But you'll see there's a tendency for people to follow their culture as opposed to Islam. Superstitions, grave worship, oppression. It's happening all over. And that's why you see these revivalists who went all over the Muslim world. They had to know their contemporary society. But, what happened in their parts of the world was very similar. The only difference was the culture of the people themselves.
One of the things that you said that he was a revivalist against was masjid affairs, and how he was saying that don't change the calling of the adhan, right? So was that in reference to like how you kind of like the rhythm in that you say the Quran, say the adhan, or is it like the wording that he was talking about?
Yeah, the question is about the changing of the adhan itself. And that was, he said, not to over-beautify it. Sometimes people beautify it so much that they're actually distorting the Arabic, meaning itself. Also, you have some extreme groups, like in the case of the Shia, they added on Ashhadu anna Ali ibn Abi Talib waliyullah. So these things he opposed. Go back to the Sunnah. There are slight variations in the Sunnah, but he said, keep it to the Sunnah and don't embellish it, don't beautify it too much to the point where it becomes, like a song and you actually lose the meaning, there of the adhan. Now, question online?
I have another one.
Okay, another one here at the class.
It's about Islam and incorporating culture, where I feel like a lot of people almost treat like, Saudi Islam, like that's the correct way to go about it. Did he have any thoughts about where that line was?
The question is about the line between culture and Islam, and did the Shaykh, have any thoughts like that? He was a person of his society itself. And so he was a Fulani, Fuller person, Hausa. He never came to change the actual culture, but really to take out the extremes. So to follow another, he never changed. He didn't start wearing Arab clothes and, whatever. I mean, even in what people think is Saudi Arabian culture today, is not actually the culture of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because in his time, they didn't wear a red ghutra over their head. And the black iqal. That is more dealing with Najd, the center of Arabia. Or even they say that the red ghutra is more Jordanians used to wear it. So that's not original sunnah. Original sunnah, you'll see a turban, coming on the back or under, the neck, and a long, loose, type of thing. It's different dress. But of course, the sunnah is certain rules that are set. How do you cover your awrah properly? Okay, so it might differ from culture to culture. So based on his teachings and the other scholars of Tajdeed, they never came to change the cultures, because you are what you are within your culture. And sometimes it's based on your climate. It's sometimes based on your people itself. But take away the negative influences. Take away the shirk, polytheism. Take away innovations. And then you make the revival. So this is what he focused on. He did not change the people into Arabs themselves. And again, as I mentioned, when he spoke to the masses of the people, he spoke to them in their languages. That's so important. When he spoke to the scholars, then he used Arabic, because the scholars all are supposed to know Arabic. So he would converse with the scholars so they can go right to the sources in Arabic. He wrote his books in Arabic, but his poetry to the masses, he did it in the local languages of Fulfulde and Hausa and Tamashek, so the masses of the people could actually get the teachings of well. So he was relevant to the people, but did not come to change the people into Arabs. No. He communicated to the people in the language that they understood. And that is the true tajweed. That is the true tajweed. Any other final questions that we have? And so Shaykh Uthman and the great scholars of Islah and Tajdeed, they find themselves being strange. They're strange in their societies, but in conclusion, we give glad tidings from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, "Inna al-Islam bada ghariban wa sayaudu ghariban fatuba lil-ghuraba." Islam began strange, and it will return to being strange. So glad tidings to the strangers. And they asked him, who are the strangers? And he told them, "Alladhina yuslihuna inda fasad an-nas." They are those who repair, they rectify society when the society has become corrupted. And Sadaqa Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, our societies have become corrupted today, and we are in need of Islah and repair. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would raise up those who can bring forward this change and take us from darkness into light. I leave you with these thoughts, and I ask Allah to have mercy on me and you. If you have gained anything from these classes, it is from Allah. The mistakes are ours, and we ask Allah to forgive us. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, wa akhira da'wana, and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.